we showed them that, oh, hey, if you're able to go to your vendors and ask for some extended terms, and you don't even need anything really more than an additional 30 days here, so getting them to push you from a net 30 to a net 60, that then takes the 800,000 that you're showing you need now down to 300,000, because you're now able to align those vendor materials with when you're actually receiving payment, to where you don't have to use your own cash to pay for those. It was a huge impact to the client, where they were like, hey, Gene, to be honest, without this, we would have gotten in here and not figured this out until we were probably 2 months in, and it would have been a disaster.
We can at least be the solution for the introduction to the person that someone can trust, or that they can work with, that they don't have to like go back to the world of like feeling like they got to square one again, you know? At least when they find us, they can say, oh, you know what, we understand what you need. This is probably the best solution, and here is someone that you can solve that for you in this manner, and you can trust. So you can at least have like the final outcome of the people journey.
12, 18 months down the road. In the meantime, I'll connect you with this person to help you out for what you are looking for, and then let's just stay in touch. And it's amazing how many of those people actually come back around. Typically of merchant cash advances. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially like a hard money daily payday loan, where I think of like an AMSCOT for businesses. You can get qualified within 24 to 48 hours. Money is there quickly, and they charge extremely high rates, and the structure in these facilities are just not in line with construction.
Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am Scott Peper, founder and CEO of Mobilization Funding, and today we are going to bring you another internal customer of ours, Gene Vandi. He's not actually a customer, but Gene works here with us. He's been here a long time. Gene has been on this journey with me and the rest of our team for almost 5 years. We can talk about all the beginnings, where we've gone through, and Gene's going to bring a unique process that I wanted to have him on the show to talk about, how we can help particular customers, some of the stories that Gene's worked with and helped side by side, and just give you a different perspective than listening to me. Gene, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
You're welcome. So tell everybody a quick, real summary, like how did we meet? Like how did you even hear about MF? Because to give an idea, Gene started in like 2019, like right before COVID, maybe right after the new year. Mm-hmm. How did you even hear about mobilization funding?
So it was through a mutual connection. So, I mean, ever since I can remember, I wanted to be like my dad growing up. So he was in sales in the copier industry, worked throughout his entire career, worked his way up to the executive level, and that's oddly how I found my start. I had an opportunity in between my junior and senior year at Florida State to do an internship in that same industry. So it was there where I got some initial experience with just the kind of ins and outs of sales, the prospecting piece, being able to really help provide a solution. And I actually was the first intern to make a sale kind of towards the end of that experience, and really just saw the impact that could make, and also how you were able to essentially help someone while also solving a problem. Mm-hmm. So that kind of solidified, hey, I think I'm on the right journey and on the right path, even though my background and degree was in finance. So I ultimately ended up kind of taking that path and coming on board full-time with that same company for the start of my career, and was there for my first 3 years. And it's funny, so that the CEO of that company, 𝗖𝗍𝗄𝗯, was our mutual connection, and how I found out about mobilization funding.
Good old Keith. You can't beat Keith.
Good old Keith. So I transitioned from that industry to Paycom and doing some HR software with them. I knew that I had some success there. I had President's Club first year, and at that time I was about a year into that journey, and Keith had given me a call. I remember it well. I was driving back from a client meeting, and he was like, hey, Gene, I got this buddy Scott. He has this finance company that he's growing, and he needs some help on the sales side. It's just getting to a point where he can't handle everything himself. So he's like, I think with your background and your experience, it would be a perfect fit. And I know you're happy where you are now, but if you're open to having a conversation, we'd love to connect the two of you and kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a natural progression to have like customer experience, understanding where you're on the natural flow. And like for me, having sold medical devices to physicians or hospital people, you get used to this relationship interaction, but there's always like there's this missing piece sometimes that is in certain things you can sell, whether it's services or products, that ultimately when you find a place that you can really land on that you fulfill, it fills that bucket, but you never know what it is until it actually happens. You've been here now, like we talked about, 4-5 years. You've seen a lot of customers come through our program. Some started right away. Some worked with us in our network and utilized the podcast or utilized some cash flow tools, and then started with a loan program. Companies that have grown from a couple $1,000,000 to tens of millions. Companies that were like in a few $100,000 on their cusp of $1 million and then grown. What are some of the things that you found those companies to find here through mobilization funding that's been the most rewarding for you in the role that you're in to help them?
Yeah, I think one of the things is just the education and the guidance that we're able to give them along that journey. So when clients come to us or business owners come to us, because they're not clients quite yet when we talk with them, they're in a variety of different states. You know, they could, like you said, they could be more so just starting that journey and emerging and starting to really get their footing under them and creating some real revenue for the business. Others could be more established and a little bit further on in that journey. So really just meeting them where they're at, understanding their challenges, and figuring out how we can tailor our solution to help solve those challenges, and then guiding them along the way. So seeing where they're at and saying, hey, have you thought about maybe hiring someone on the accounting side? Because through those conversations, we see that maybe they could kind of sharpen their pencil there. Or, of course, our secret sauce is our cash flow. So that really helps provide them with the insight and the data that they need to make really good decisions. And for some of those businesses that are maybe in some of the earlier stages, those owners are able to view their business through a lens that they just haven't viewed it through in the past. And it's amazing how eye-opening that can be, because at the end of the day, a lot of these business owners are really great at what they do in the operation side, but they might not be as savvy when it comes to finance or a spreadsheet. And like just being able to help guide them through some of those mission critical items within their business, and being able to kind of help show them, hey, here's when you need cash to run a project, and here's how much you need it, or here's when you need to help pay for these expenses. And then also the solution that we're providing and how it helps solve that problem. It's amazing what types of decisions they can make and how it can help drive efficiencies within their business.
So let's talk about that. So like you mentioned the cash flow tool being like secret sauce and how people can really get that. So I'm a business owner. I call up or I hear about mobilization funding or someone refers them to us and they call to you, right? And you pick up the phone or they reach out. What is the typical problem that customer's trying to solve?
Could be one of typically three scenarios. One, they have a specific problem they're trying to solve. So it's a business owner that maybe has just been awarded a project or a contract. They are now figuring out a way that they're going to then execute on that contract. So whenever that happens, it's a great day in the office, high five, and hey, we won it, we got the bid. But then that's when the real work kind of starts is, hey, okay, well, how I have this now $1 million contract. How am I going to turn that into actual cash, into actual revenue for the business? So in those scenarios, we're listening to them. We are having some pretty direct conversations from the start. We're still learning about their business, but then we're diving directly into that project and seeing what we can do to help them and support that specific revenue generating opportunity for them.
And then you mentioned the cash flow tool. So like what kind of information can either a leader of a business, the CFO, CEO, or the business owner themselves, what can they expect to learn and understand from the cash flow tool? We talk about this cash flow tool. Oh, we know your cash flow. Okay, well, a lot of them probably have their cash flow. But when they do the cash flow using the cash flow tool and the cash flow now is redefined for them, what are the eye-opening things that all of a sudden they become aware of? So someone hearing this is like, oh yeah, cool guys, great cash flow tool, awesome. But like, what does that mean? Like, so what is those things that like what are the things you've heard customers say before that are like, wow, I didn't realize, boom.
So one thing is I didn't realize that, oh, I had this margin on my project. That is the first thing. They didn't even just realize the simple, hey, here's what I'm going to bill versus here's what my expenses are.
Positively or negatively.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they'll be surprised and say, oh, wow, I thought I had a little bit of a higher margin. Sometimes they'll be surprised positively and say, oh, wow, this is higher than I thought it was. This is great, once I've laid everything out. So just having that foundation and plan, I think, can be very eye-opening and insightful when they're initially looking at that. And then they are able to see in that cash flow model where the gaps lie. So when they're going to need cash to potentially cover a certain expense to make sure that they're staying cash flow positive and they have enough cash week over week to run the project. Or also, once they have that foundation, they can then utilize that to manage the project while it's active. So when something does change, and especially in construction, it's not a matter of if, but when, they already have that roadmap, and then it's much easier to go in and tweak something here or there and then see how that changes the rest of your schedule so you can then plan accordingly and be a little bit more proactive versus reactive.
So do you have an example of a customer that, like, you built the cash flow with them and all of a sudden they were able to make a decision that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to make? Like, do you have an example of like, hey, here's a decision they were able to make or a pivot that helped them change the dynamics of that project or somehow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just had a client here recently where they had a $2 million project. They had a 25% margin, so they were stoked that they won the project. And when we built out the cash flow model, with this particular project, they had net 60 payment terms. So it meant that they essentially were working for 30 days, then billing, then waiting another 60 days to get paid. And in this case, the project was only 4 months long. So imagine 75% of their expenses are being incurred essentially before they're receiving their first payment. What that cash flow model showed us was that $2 million project required $800,000 of cash and capital in order to actually complete that project and make sure that you had what you needed to cover those expenses until it actually started to flow and those receivables started to come in. So what we were able to see, though, in that cash flow model was, in this particular case, it was very heavily weighted on the materials. And they had net 30 terms traditionally with their material vendors. So we showed them that, oh, hey, if you're able to go to your vendors and ask for some extended terms, and you don't even need anything really more than an additional 30 days here, so getting them to push you from a net 30 to a net 60, that then takes the 800,000 that you're showing you need now down to 300,000, because you're now able to align those vendor materials with when you're actually receiving payment to where you don't have to use your own cash to pay for those. Nice. So that was a huge impact to the client, where they were like, hey, Gene, to be honest, without this, we would have gotten in here and not figured this out until we were probably 2 months in, and it would have been a disaster. And then also, if we didn't have kind of this guidance and we knew that was going to be 800,000, we might not have even done the project. And now that you have showed us that, hey, if we just kind of make this tweak here and there, we're able to then reduce that by more than half. This is a project that is now very doable for us and something that we can 100% support.
Yeah. All right, Gene, simple question. What are the biggest mistakes or the most common mistakes that you see business owners coming to us with that often they can kind of solve that, so they can figure out solutions through our process? Meaning, like, what are they doing wrong from a finance or planning perspective that they want to fix, but what are the most common things? So if someone's listening to this right now, they're like, oh, you know what, like, I'm kind of nervous to call the lender. I hate being evaluated. I don't like getting judged, which is all common, and that's normal. No one does it. And, a lot of folks have gone to banks and heard, no, you're doing this wrong, or you're terrible at this. And that's not our style to communicate that way. But there are things that people are doing wrong that they always want to fix, or they want to do better at. What are those most common things that you see folks coming to us with that if they had, in a perfect world, they could fix now, or they could tighten their game up a little bit on? What are those common things that we see that you would like to let people know that, these are the things to focus on that we can also help with?
One of the things that I think makes us unique and special is it's a judgment-free zone here at MF. So no matter who comes to us, we're not like your typical lender where we're passing judgment. We understand that everyone's at a different stage, and we just want to do everything we can to help them where they're at. So some of the key things that we'll see in kind of some common pitfalls is one, just not really having a plan in the first place. So I'd say first off, just establishing some sort of plan and having an idea of where you want to go. Very rarely are you going to get into the car and just start driving. You're going to have some sort of destination. So much easier to get there if you know where you want to go and kind of have a sense of how you want to get there. One thing that I do see is they could be also a lot of times a little bit more organized. So when you think about what you would traditionally want to have on hand as a business owner, you'd want to have a current set of financials. You'd want to have someone in your either accounting team or partnered with a good accountant that can help provide that for you and also help you manage and maintain it. You also want to make sure that you have a good foundation on the operation side and making sure that you're not really stretching yourself too thin there. So we'll just ask questions around like, hey, size of your team, what do you guys have going on, and maybe make some suggestions there. We already talked about the cash flow. Cash flow is a huge tool that we provide that helps with insight into the specific projects or revenue generating opportunities that we're helping them with. So that's another thing that I think we're able to provide some tremendous value. And I think those are the main ones for the most part. And yeah, I mean, with us too, anything that we're unable to advise on or provide direct help with, we always want to point them in the right direction. So that's the other way that I think that we can help is using our network of resources and partners to say, hey, this is a need or something that you need help fill in the gap on. While we might not be able to do it directly, we can at least help you or connect you with someone that can.
Yeah, one of the things you said to me one time that is in a side conversation, but you said, one of the things I like the best is at least if we can't help somebody, which most of the time we're not always the direct best source at this moment, right? Mm-hmm. But you said one of the things I like the best is we can at least be the solution for the introduction to the person that someone can trust or that they can work with, that they don't have to like go back to the world of like feeling like they got to square one again, At least when they find us, they can say, oh, you know what? We understand what you need. This is probably the best solution, and here is someone that you can solve that for you in this manner and you can trust. So you can at least have like the final outcome of the people journey, because that's the hardest part, I think, sometimes for folks trying to find the right lender or the right capital partner or the right structure. It's these endless conversations that you have to have with folks over and over and over again. That might be the lender, might be pretending to be the lender, might not be the lender, might say they have the lender, fee agreement. I mean, it's just annoying. I get it, right? And so do you. And so I think that was one of the coolest things that you said to me one time. It was in our own little conversation, but it made a lot of sense.
Well, if you think about it too, these business owners, they're getting peppered constantly there's just so much out there in the way of marketing and, this guru here, or hey, this is the new special way to do something. And it can be very difficult to sift through all that to someone that you can ultimately trust and that ultimately is going to provide the solution that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So if we can help be that conduit and say, hey, we've worked with this person in the past, we know that they do X, Y, and Z, which aligns with exactly what you're looking for. And, hey, by the way, we worked with them for, extended period of time. You can trust them. Having that stamp of approval and pointing them in that direction, goes a long way. And not only that, but they remember that. So you just mentioned it. There's more times than not, clients or business owners that come to us, opportunities, they're not quite ready for mobilization funding for one reason or another. Could be maybe the project's not a great fit, could be because maybe their business doesn't quite qualify yet. And in those instances, like we said, we'll do everything we can to help. And also, what also makes us different is we'll educate them. So we also, whenever possible, will give feedback to someone that is not able to qualify for our program at that time and say, hey, here's some of the things that you can work on in the meantime to better position yourself 6, 12, 18 months down the road. In the meantime, I'll connect you with this person to help you out for what you are looking for. And then let's just stay in touch. And it's amazing how many of those people actually come back around. I think of like H&L, for example. This was a business owner that I spoke with in my first 12 to 18 months here at Mobilization Funding. At the time, it just wasn't a good fit. I think the business was coming out of COVID, so it was just a little bit turbulent time anyway. They were ramping back up. They were just a little bit shy on some of the key qualifications that we kind of look at there. But we had some great conversations. We were able to help them out, stayed in touch. They actually came back around about 12 months later. Still was not the right time, but still thanked us, stayed in touch, provided value, continued to kind of follow, a lot of the stuff you put out on the podcast and YouTube. And, every time I talked with Abraham, he was like, you guys just get it. You really understand the challenges, and I really just want to find a way to work with you guys. And then he came back around again less than 12 months ago, kind of towards the end of 2023. And at that point, he had heeded our advice. He had done a lot of things within his business that we had recommended to better position himself. And at that point, he was able to qualify. And we have developed a great relationship since. We're just actually getting through our first project loan with him, and already have 2 or 3 behind it that we're looking at. So, I mean, that's a great example of someone that we helped, stayed in touch with, came back around, and now is part of the MF family.
That's cool. He is a great story. He's a perfect example of everything we talked about. But he's also the perfect example of a regular business owner that started a business and is trying to grind it out and figure out ways to get new customers and finance the deals you do have, small, medium, large, when to go after the big ones, when to go after the small ones. Is there a right manufacturer to use? Is the lowest cost manufacturer always the best versus one that you can count on that maybe you pay more for but have better terms with? I mean, he is a great example of the dynamics of a business and managing them properly. And also realizing that you don't need to be in a hurry. Like, you're not retiring anytime soon, right? The journey might be 2 decades or more long. Like, you don't have to get to the finish line in the first 2 years. Just give yourself some grace. Like, let yourself learn, let that expand. Don't take such great risks early on that you could destroy yourself in the whole business. Take some risks. You're not going to get anywhere not doing that, but be calculated about them, and he's a great example of that.
Oh yeah, and we see it all the time. You can get a little bit over your skis, and you almost sink the ship before it even gets out of the harbor because you don't allow for that time in some of those early stages to, give yourself the grace and understanding of hey, I'm early in this journey. I have a lot to learn. You come in with certain tools and skill sets, but over time, once you get in there, then you develop those, and you realize that you need a whole new set of tools in your tool belt, and are then able to kind of increase your capacity over time. But it's the one thing that you can't remove from equation, which we've talked about all the time, is time. You just have to kind of give it the appropriate time, and in that time, you got to have some aggressive patience and make sure that you're still pushing and doing everything you can to move the needle, and not sitting back and waiting for things to happen. But it's going to take usually a couple years to learn some of the key lessons that you need to learn. And, that's one of the other things we try and help with, too, for the clients that we work with, is we've seen a lot of those lessons with our other clients. So then, again, kind of going back to the educating of sharing some of those stories and saying, oh, hey, I saw this over here with this client. Hey, maybe you just want to be aware of it so you can potentially avoid that same mistake on your end. And, they're always extremely thankful for it.
Yeah. So if there was 1 or 2 things that you want to share with a commercial subcontractor and say, hey, if you do nothing else here, nothing else, just avoid doing these 2 things or avoid these things. These are the things that lead to the worst problems that we've seen. What would be those 2 things or one of those things?
That's a good question. I think one thing that I see that's most common with the business owners we work with are the wrong type of financing. So I think specifically of merchant cash advances. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially like a hard money daily payday loan where I think of an AMSCOT for businesses. You can get qualified within 24 to 48 hours. Money is there quickly, and they charge extremely high rates, and the structure in these facilities are just not in line with construction. It's very difficult for a lot of business owners to support these facilities because of the high cost and because of the structure, but especially construction, because the way that these facilities work is you are having to repay daily or weekly, and it's automatically taken out of your business account whether you have the cash there or not. So they're really much more transactional. They're not focused on the relationship. And if you're in construction and you're doing everything right, sometimes you're only getting paid once per month, on these projects. And even if you're staggering them to where you have a couple different active ones, there's definitely a potential there to have some cash flow gaps due to those facilities. And they're usually used in a short-term, like emergency type situation. But because they are so predatory and the cost associated with them, once you get into one, it can be very difficult not to then get into another one and then another one.
It's funny. I had a business owner give me the best analogy who was using it. They were using MCAs and they were very fortunate to get out of them. But he said, you know what? He played football. He said, Scott, it's like spraining your ankle and needing to play. You really want to play. So instead of laying off it like you're supposed to and doing ice and all that, you have a game the next day. So you shoot it up, you numb it, and you get out and play. And then after the game, you realize that you now broke it and tore it and have to be amputated, right? And it was an extreme analogy, but his example resonated with me, one, because I've sprained my ankle many times and it hurts like hell, but particularly the first time. But what he was saying was, like, you have this pain, and it's short term, and it's in this world it becomes I'm fearful of making payroll, or I have to make this payment, material payment. So you get the quick fix, i.e. the steroid shot, right? You numb the pain of now you don't need payroll. But by the time that wears off, which in this world usually is 2, 3, 4 weeks later, the pain that comes from the amount of cash that you pulled out of the business to make these payments and the ongoing nature of how much you have to do far outweighs the actual short-term pain of just that you solve by getting a deposit in your account. And now you have to work typically a massive amount of contracts and revenue just to pay back the interest cost on that. And he made a great example. He said, look, Scott, I borrow $100,000 and pay back $140,000. Well, for me to make $40,000 on a 20% margin, I literally need to have a $200,000 project in order to make that money back. And for me to get a $200,000 project, execute it, be paid, that's going to take me 6, 7, 8 months sometimes, depending on what it is. And in some cases, you borrow even more money in their business, even larger. And so if you think about it that way, it's how much more work are you going to have to put forth to get these jobs? And so it works perfect for a restaurant if you're swiping credit cards every day and getting paid. Yeah. And so he said, I can see that. My friends use them. But for construction, no good for me. And I thought his analogy of the ankle was just fascinating because that's what we've seen too. We've seen so many people dip their toe into the merchant cash advance world and then they lose their leg or they end up in bankruptcy.
And they just don't know what they're getting into is really what it boils down to. And once they do, it's almost too late and they are then not sure exactly how to kind of dig their way out of that. So, I mean, I tell our clients, in the event that you ever think you need to go get an MCA, please come talk to us. Like, we will do everything we can to help you directly first. And then if not, we will then try and set you up with at least someone like we've talked about that can help and is reputable and will actually advise you on the best one to go with and what you're actually getting into. Because, I mean, if you need to use a small one for a very specific purpose, short term, and you know exactly what you're getting into and you got a plan in place, that's maybe where it could make sense for like a few specific instances, but outside of that, like I think there's just really no place for them in construction. And as a whole, I think the industry, that piece needs to be regulated a little bit more because you and I see it all the time. You have some really great businesses and some really great business owners that just don't know what they're getting into. And by the time they realize what happened, they don't have a business anymore.
That's right. All right, man, we're moving to the rapid fire questions, okay? What's the best advice you've ever received that pertains to business?
Just start. Can't can't be in the game unless you start. So I feel like a lot of people just overanalyze what they got to do to get going, and one of the greatest teachers is experience. So once you're in the game and you're going, even if it's a rocky start or whatever that experience is, you're learning along the way, and it's amazing how quickly you can develop and evolve once you get started.
What's your favorite business book that you like to recommend that you think makes a great impact and can help folks?
Winning by Tim Grover is one of my favorites. It's a newer one. For those of you that like sports, and that don't know Tim Grover, he was the trainer for Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, I think Dwayne Wade, some other very notable athletes. And he uses in that book some stories from his time working with those athletes to kind of reinforce some messages. And it's just a really cool take on what it takes to be at the top of your game, and has some really cool stories in there.
Yeah. And what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
I would say 75 hard or live hard, and I got you to thank for that. So I don't know that before starting here I could have ever seen myself doing something like that, and I couldn't be happier that that's something that I did the first time and have continued to do throughout the years.
It's a great mental reset. For those of you that don't know, 75 Hard, the Live Hard program is created by Andy Frisella. You can see it and find it on his podcast, which is called The Real AF, and I think it's episode 116, maybe. I think it is.
That's impressive.
I've heard him mention it a bunch of times on the show, but you'll have to check. If you Google 75 Hard and haven't been living under a rock, you'll see it in 2 seconds. So, but yeah, it's his program. It's an amazing program, and I would agree. I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. Any last comments, Gene, or anything you wish I asked you that I didn't?
No, I think this is a good start for now. I really appreciate you having me on, and hopefully I'll get a chance to come back on for an episode down the road.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, everybody, that's a wrap for this episode. If you found it helpful, I hope so. I thought it'd be good to bring in somebody else from the team to let you hear from rather than me, and a little bit about MF from behind the scenes and from a different perspective. So share it with some friends. Follow us on YouTube. If you can check out both Gene and I on LinkedIn, we'd love to connect with you. And in the meantime, have a great week, and God bless you.